It is finally time for us to actually start building our first custom loop water-cooled PC, and hopefully I've got enough parts, and hopefully we also don't get no leaks. Now, we've been prepping for this moment for a while now, since we started collecting parts for our first custom loop water-cooled PC. I've done a number of videos on the parts that we've actually purchased, and we haven't actually spent that much on it, but I do think I've got some pretty decent stuff. The system we're going to be installing this in is obviously this one. This is, for anybody that hasn't been watching the channel, an old workstation PC. It was a HP Z240 workstation. We did a bit of modification to get the motherboard to work in another case. It's had a new power supply, a new cooler. We upgraded its RAM and its CPU and things like that. And we also purchased a graphics card for this. It's not a great graphics card. It's pretty old now. It's an AMD Radeon HD 6970. It's not much good for gaming, but it did come with water blocks, so that kind of helped us out with doing this kind of job. The other parts that we've got, of course, are our pump and our reservoir. We've also built a tap system on this, which I've done a slight modification on since you guys last saw it. We've now actually got a bit of a tee-off here with a tap, so that when we mount it in, we can actually get the pipes to where they need to be and obviously drain the system off. We have our CPU block here. It's a very cheap one. I'm not sure how good it's going to be, but it doesn't really matter for a system like this because this is an older 6th gen Intel i5, I believe, that's in this, so not really going to get that warm. And to be honest, I wouldn't water cool a system like this. Usually we're just using it as a bit of a sandbox just to be able to build the system and kind of learn really how to do it. It doesn't really matter if I blow this system up or if we get any leaks and it damages anything, because it was pretty cheap to put together and we're not going to lose a lot. I've already put the pipe fittings pretty much in everything. You saw that in a previous video. We've got the pipe fittings in the block there. We've got our 240mm radiator and we've already got our pipe connections in there too. We did that again on the other video. We have some water cooling liquid to put in there. We've got some pipe. We also have our EK leak tester, so we can test for any leaks once we've built the system. So the last thing to do really is actually start putting it together. Now, to be able to do that, I'm actually going to tear this motherboard out, and that means we can actually see what we're doing when we install the CPU block. And then we'll put the motherboard back in again and we'll start fitting all of the components. Now that we've got our motherboard out, we can actually see what we're doing. At the moment, we have a pretty stock looking Arctic fan on our CPU. We will of course need to remove that, and they're pretty simple. It uses the little plug systems that stock Intel CPU coolers kind of do. So we'll just pull those pegs out, and of course we're going to be replacing it with the CPU water block. Now there is, of course, the fan is actually plugged into a fan header here, but our pump itself uses a Molex connection to kind of control the power and stuff. We'll have to figure out how we all kind of plug this stuff in later, but for now we're going to remove this fan and we'll kind of just chuck it over here. And then, as we can see, the CPU is clean. Now, to fit this CPU block, I'm not 100% sure which way it actually goes round. I'm assuming that we'll go side to side with the actual plugs. It seems to be the best way to fit it, but I'm not really sure which one is the intake or the outtake. It didn't really say on the device. So usually I have a little symbol for in and out, but it's a very cheap one, and we're just gonna have to guess. This one does have a bit of plastic on the back, so you will need to make sure you remove that. If you leave that on, it's going to get really hot and you're going to think that you've ruined the job anyway. Lots of people do end up leaving them on, particularly on AIOs, and then they obviously worry about the temperatures later. But apart from that, it's actually going to fit on just over the top, just like that. Now, to fit this, we do have some screw fittings here, so we'll need to unbox them, and I'm kind of going to be guessing at how this all stuff kind of goes together, to be honest. There is no instructions that come with these cheap water blocks, so you can kind of assume that you know what you're doing. It does have two little plastic washers, so I'm assuming one will go one side of the motherboard and the other will go the other. A spring which could go either on top maybe, just to hold it down. I assume that's going to go on top. And then we've got a little nut and a little thread down. So let's, to begin with, start to just try and build it really. One thing we can do here is that we can actually take the screw with a rubber washer, insert it through the back, flip the board over, put the other plastic washer on the top of the screw. Then taking the little nut, we'll wind it down. This should actually just keep the screws in place then. And of course, we'll need to do that for each corner. Now that I've got all the screws actually inserted there, we need to drop the board back down, and of course we need to fit this water block. Again, I'm not really sure which way these are going to go around, so we're just going to fit it, hope for the best. If it actually has any kind of temperature issues, we'll have to tear it all apart and swap it around. But of course, before we even drop this on, we will need some thermal paste. For that, I'm going to go super cheap. I'm not going to go expensive on the thermal paste because this is purely a test, and I'm probably going to have to tear it apart anyway to turn this around. So for now, we're going to just put a bit of thermal paste on there. we will drop the cooler down across those screws, and it's meeting the CPU now. Got the little springs on each of the threads, and then we get these nice little thumb style screwed locking nuts, which we'll put on each corner, and we'll go down corner to corner and we'll tighten it all up. With the water block reasonably tight now and evenly distributed, we just need to pop it back in the case and we're ready to start actually adding everything else. The first thing that we will also need to add into the case is of course the radiator system, which I will need some fans for, and I'm going to use some fans that will actually match the rest of the system, so kind of will look kind of cool and it'll actually go within the theme. So we've now got the motherboard built back into the system, and we've also mounted the top radiator with the twin fans on it. We've got all our connections here and here. We've got our connections on the CPU block there. But before I reinstall the graphics card, I want to try and figure out where we can actually mount the pump and the reservoir. It's not the easiest case to kind of fit things into. We were originally going to use this bracket here, but by the time we've actually mounted it onto one of the fans in the front, the pump will actually be hitting the roof. So we've decided to do something a little bit more different. Inside this case on the front, there's actually a panel which you can remove. It is there to kind of hide cables really, but if we actually take it out, we can actually see if we can actually do something with it. And this is that panel itself. It does have a bit of a GPU mounting bracket on this, and it also hides all the cables, but we do have lots of little slide panels on this and lots of little holes. So I'm just going to wonder if we can actually mount this pump and reservoir directly to it. The pump itself does come with an extra bracket that just gets removed, so all we need to do really is just line it up onto here, and as we can see there are multiple holes that will actually fit it. That is actually pretty good luck, so I'm going to just mount it to this and then see if it will actually fit into the system. Now with the reservoir and pump bracket actually mounted to this kind of case bracket, we can see that all it needs to do is just slot down onto the bracket and that's it. It'll actually sit in the case like that. So that's actually going to work fantastic. All we need to do now is actually reinstall this back into the case, and I'm hoping that we can actually still get all the pipework fitted and everything working, but we're going to have to try that in a minute. So let's get this bracket reinstalled back into the case and see if we can actually get the pump on top of it while it's in there. The bracket is now installed into the case, so as long as this actually reaches in there and fits on, we should be good to go. We should be able to just put it up to there and drop it in. It's actually now just sitting into the front of the case. That pump and reservoir actually looks really smart there. It's a little bit close to the front fans, but I think it's actually going to look pretty cool, and we are pretty close to connecting up the pipes to the radiator. Of course we now need to cut some pipe to actually get that installed, so let's do a bit of a measure up. We'll flip the case down so you guys can see, and we'll see if we can actually get a pipe on it or not. To be honest, I'm not holding my breath on that one at all, because I think it's a little bit tight and I'm not sure whether we're going to actually have a bit of a kink in the pipe, but let's have a look. So for this connection here, unfortunately we do have the tap on the back of the reservoir, and that's just so that these actually line up a lot. We can take the collars off the connections, and then we need to get a little bit of a pipe to go from here into the reservoir itself. It shouldn't actually have to be that long, probably only about that long really. So we'll cut that pipe off and we'll see if we can actually get it fitted and see if there's any kinks in it. With a little bit of pipe now cut, we should be able to connect that up quite well. It might be a little bit long, but better being long than it is should be short. We'll just try and get this onto the radiator itself, just like that. Obviously remember to put a collar on, otherwise you're going to get trapped later on. Everything is a little bit tight in this system at the moment. We may need to go around and tweak some things later, but for now that should be pretty close on. And then of course we need to actually get it onto there. I might just move the pump up a little bit for now, see if we can get it on before we actually get it into the system. Pipes are a little bit tight, but then they're supposed to be tight, otherwise you would get leaks. Obviously, remember, put your collar on first. I nearly made the mistake that I just told you not to make. Well, there we go, we've got the pipe on. Let's put the collar down for now. This should just lock the pipe on it a little bit. And my biggest fear at the moment is this pipe, because it is slightly kinked. You can feel the kinks in it. I'm not sure whether that's because it's a little bit too long or not, but the only thing that I can do is probably remove the radiator, try to take some of the kinks out of it. It is at the lowest point that it can be, and it's not looking great. So let's just pop the radiator out, and then we'll try and just trim a bit of this pipe off, and it should actually straighten it out a bit more. It's because it's trying to bend the pipe itself. Right, so I trimmed a little bit off that pipe and it actually seems to fit a little bit better. It's not perfect. It kind of needs a bigger space between the reservoir and the radiator itself. If you're actually using hard pipe, you could probably do it, to be honest. You could probably get a nice little tight bend in there. But this stuff isn't actually as flexible as it kind of makes out to be. But we've got it installed now, so all we need to do now is obviously hook up the CPU cooler to the radiator, get the graphics card in, and put the other 2 pipes in. So let's flip it back down and let's get them things installed. Now all of these runs should be a lot simpler because they are much bigger, so we should be able to get a nice flex in. If we actually just weigh up the graphics card here, this one actually quite aligns to this one, so I'm going to take this bit here to the return to the radiator. Then we'll come out of here into the bottom of here and then like that. So let's first put that radiator one in and then it'll kind of be out of our way. Not exactly sure how long we'll need this pipe. Maybe that one will do. Maybe that's actually a little bit too short, so let's find a bigger pipe. That one a little bit bigger. So this pipe here is a little bit bigger. Maybe that one will go there. We can kind of get away with that. I'm not sure. I think it'll flex up, but let's get it installed anyway. Now that pipe is installed onto the radiator. That's actually a nice little clean curve here. Probably could have done with a little bit less taken off of it, but I'm not going to mess around with it for now. Let's just make sure that the system works. We can always trim some pipes up later, drain the system off, and it should work perfectly fine. Now the piece that we used before here should be long enough. Maybe we've got a smaller piece. That one is too short. I don't think that one will fit. Maybe it will. Let's give it a go. Let's see if this one will fit. It might be a nice tidy job. It might be a little bit too tight. The last piece is obviously going to come from here now, from the pump itself into the graphics card. I'm not quite sure that this one is long enough because it's going to have to actually have some weird flex on it here. I'm gonna have to go like back on itself a little bit. We'll try this cable anyway, and we'll try this pipe, see if it actually reaches. If not, we've got a little bit more that we can actually cut off things. We'll first stick it onto the graphics card this time, rotate the pipe just a little bit, and then we'll take it over here into the pump. Don't forget to put our collars on. This might actually work. Now apparently that does reach, although it is pushing this here. It is on a flexible joint, so the tap system itself doesn't have to exactly be straight. I just like it straight because I thought it looked nice. But apart from that, everything looks like it's actually fitting. Turn that tap slightly, just so we've got a bit of flex in there. And there we'd have it. Everything seems to be fit. Now I've got everything installed into the system. The pipe weight actually fit quite well. I'm not sure if we're ever going to get any leaks on any of that because some of them are a little bit tight, but we've got all the pipe weight going in to the reservoir and pump, and we've also connected up our EK water blocks leak tester. Now the theory with this is that we just need to pump the system up and see if it actually holds air, and if it does, then it should be good to go, and put some water in it. Now apparently, according to our leak tester, there are no leaks in this system, but I don't really know how good these are. So there's only one way really to test it, and that is obviously to put some water in it. For the water, I've picked up this. It was just really cheap. I don't know if it's any good. It might not be, but does it matter for our bit of our demo system here? And I've kind of installed it into here. I did actually remove the plug off the top of the reservoir, which is obviously in the front here, and to be honest, it's really difficult to get to, so that's probably a bad idea where I installed that. I might just pipe a new one to it. If I'm honest, while I'm trying to play with this system and trying to seal things off, because it didn't seal straight away, I had to go around and tweak things, what you really need is a much bigger case. You can do it in a case this size, obviously, as we've done it and that, but it's a little bit tight, and trying to get your hands into places to try and really lock things off is a little bit awkward. I do have another couple of cases, so what I might do is actually try this on a different system. As long as this proof of concept goes well, I'll learn a lot of lessons, and we'll probably try it on an even bigger case, somewhere where you can actually really get your hands in. But of course we need to put some water in it, and for that we also need to make sure that we get the pump going. And to do that, I'm gonna actually be using this. I'm not gonna turn the system on. You should never turn the system on beforehand. You should always get the pump up and running before, so that it can get any bubbles out of the system, test for any kind of leaks, that kind of stuff. This is our test power supply. It's one that I kind of modified just to work. It just gets the Molex running, so I just need that Molex connection here. I'll plug it into the wall, and the unit itself does have a switch on it. So what we need to do is obviously pull the pump cable out here, and we'll just connect it up to the power supply. This should provide it with a full 12-volt feed, so it'll go full speed. So if it's loud, I do apologize. I don't know how loud that pump is, but I'm sure once we start putting water in it, we're going to find out. To make sure there's no leaks, or to at least try to detect them, I'm going to put some paper into the system. Using these kind of fill little bottles, I just purchased this to do this actual job. We just need to kind of get it into the hole at the back there. I will need to put my hand around just to push it into the hole a little bit more. The fill on this is in a very awkward place. But then we just need to start filling that reservoir. As we can see, the water is coming out of the pump and it's going into this pipe here. Once we actually hit the level where it'll start going up in the reservoir itself, we'll turn the pump on and we'll get it to start actually pumping the water around instead of us doing it through the top. Let's turn the pump on and see what happens. There we go, the pump is pumping the water around now. See the air bubbles coming through, so we'll keep filling it up. You can kind of hear when the pump goes dry because it makes a bit of a noise. I believe as well you shouldn't actually run these pumps when they're dry because it actually damages them. So what we're going to do is we're going to do this manually. So the system itself does seem to be quite full now. It is actually doing a loop. It's not going dry. The pump's not going dry. So maybe we don't need that much water anymore. Now what's already in this system is around 400 milliliters. So I've gotten it up to the 200 because clearly we don't need another 400 milliliters. If we look at the pump itself here, or at least the reservoir, we can see that the water level is actually about 3/4 of the way up. It's actually quite far up, but there is a lot of air still in this system. So the more we actually leave the pump on and travel things around, the lower that level will get. So what we'll do is we'll leave the pump on for 5-10 minutes, see what kind of levels we've got, and then we'll do a top up. So how cool is this? The system is actually running perfectly fine. It's been running for about 15 to 20 minutes now, and there isn't a single leak on the system at all. We've not felt anything, and pretty much all of the air bubbles have come out of everything. We just give the system a little bit of a tilt just to make sure, so we can just see some now traveling for that pipe. So there must have been something stuck in this block. And if we tip it back the other way, we should be able to see more. So yeah, we can see more bubbles now traveling through. They're going into the reservoir. But that's basically all we need to do. We just need to leave this system now on for much, much longer. And eventually all the air bubbles will come out. I'm not actually that happy with the noise of the pump. I don't know if you guys can actually hear that, but it is actually quite loud. It is at 100% and it does have extra connections. So we could connect it up to a header just to control that speed a little bit, depending on how hot the system's getting. But I'm actually super impressed so far. And there we have it, my first ever custom loop water cooled machine. The build itself was actually pretty simple. I did do multiple videos before this where we actually constructed everything, put it all together, learned how to do that kind of stuff, but I pretty much learned quite a lot on this. There are still no leaks on this system so far, but I do want to leave it overnight running just to make sure I can get all the air out of the system, and then it will be ready for its first boot up. If you would like me to do a video on that, make sure you comment down below. Do you want to see me actually boot this system up? Maybe we'll do a bit of a benchmark on the HD 6970. I don't know. Probably totally not worth it nowadays, but this system is good for something that I can just play with going forward and learn to do even more custom loop kind of things. I think I'm ready now to just have a look at upping the game a bit and actually, you know, building a better water cooled system. I do eventually want to actually put a hard loop system onto my benching rig because that system does use a 12700K, which gets very, very warm. So I just want to do a very simple CPU update on that one. But we'll see how things go. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you like this kind of content and you want to see where we actually take this system next. Maybe we'll do something else cool with it. Maybe it'll just leak and blow up and we won't do anything with it. I don't know. But I'm sure as always, we'll catch you guys in the next one.